let's look at the efforts being made by the BRICS nation to de-dollarize global economy. With Russia taking the lead, there are efforts being made to launch new payment platform that will not be controlled by the United States and has nothing to do with the dollar. What will be the impact of these on global economy, and how successful will this effort be in order to de-dollarize global economy? The economic bloc, BRICS, is getting stronger every day with new members joining and others showing interest. How will this play out for global economy? Let's shift the conversation to Dr. Idahosa Osamhanze, who joins us now on Early Exchange. Glad you have joined us this morning.
Femi, good morning. My pleasure to be here.
Good morning, sir.
Welcome to the show. Good morning.
All right. The economic bloc, the BRICS, is getting stronger. So it appears, and in reality it is, having new members virtually, every now and then. But now the effort is being put in place to ensure that they de-dollarize global economy. And the plan is to launch an international payment platform that will not be controlled by the United States. And even the currency as well will be to shift attention from the dominance of the dollar. How do you see this play out?
Well, I think it's part of the international systems that when nations assume power, the first thing to do is to entrench their own means of exchange as the principal exchange signal for the world. You see, before the dollar became the source of exchange, because British has ruled the world, and they, of course, were the owner of almost all goods. So it was interesting to see that every currency in the world was backed up with gold. But after the First and the Second World War, given the overwhelming victory that came with the American sophisticated weapon power, the international system was reordered, and what you find is that dollar became the currency for global transactions. And of course, every country has been running against the dollar. So what we're seeing here is that, again, like they say international relations, the means of power has changed from where people used to have large army, you have territory, you have natural resources as the ultimate determinant of power. Today, power has changed, and of course, those who control technology is the one who's actually in control of power. So we're seeing a China who is conquering the whole world in terms of what they're doing with power. We're seeing Russia, of course, coming again alive, aligning with China to see how to build a second bloc that will be stronger and more bigger than the U.S. economy. But the extent to which this will stand is still something that still will need to be desired, because if you look at the map of the wealth of the world, you still see that a greater proportion of the wealth still stands with the United States of America, and it's still more powerfully in terms of resource, in terms of the military might and sophistication. They are still there. For example, the GDP of BRIC nation is about 28% of global GDP, while that of the America alone stand at about 46%. And this is show you where the power is. So to what extent will the BRIC nation drive this? Is something that they needed to be looked into in the days and in the weeks to come.
Sir, this move by the Russia or most of the countries in the BRIC bloc didn't start now. There's been build up to it to de-dollarize at least the global economy. Do you see it as being too aggressive, the level they've gone to now?
Well, I don't think it's about aggressiveness. It's the challenge of most nations in the world managing their monetary policy against the dollar. And so I think that's the real issue. You see, most of the thing we are having today in Nigeria, if the value of the dollar gets higher, and of course you are here buying, it definitely affects you. So what the BRIC nations are doing really is to have an alternate currency, and I'm not sure that they can actually legislate out the dollar, is to see that in our trade with ourselves, we have an alternative currency that will be acceptable to member nations. Just like you have in the EU region, the euro. So when EU countries are trading with themselves, what you see is that they use euro, but that does not delegitimize the use of dollars in the European Union. So what you are likely going to see is a BRICS nation, maybe eventually in the longer run, agreeing to have maybe a common currency that, of course, will be acceptable as legal tender within the member states. And then, of course, that facilitates trade. And the shock that always comes with the dominance of dollar may not be overly felt in those regions. So I don't think it's a belligerent move. I just feel it's an economic move to see how the BRIC nation are able to actually put in place this structure that will help the flow of trade among member nations.
Now, let's talk about the role being played by Russia. You know, Russia happens to be, if I may use the word, ringleader now. Why do you think Russia is championing this kind of conversation as regards creating alternatives and also the de-dollarization of the global economy?
Yeah, I think it's just the sentiment of the war that is ongoing between Russia and NATO. I don't want to call it war between Russia and Ukraine. So it is the sentiment of the war between Russia and NATO. And what we have seen is that all assets of Russia is confiscated by NATO members. And so to that extent, you're trying to incapacitate Russia, and they are not able to do business with outside world. And therefore, it's only very, very reasonable for Russia to be thinking of a solution or alternative to the problem that they challenge, or the running battle between the Putin government and NATO is currently presenting to the world. This is where the real issues are, and I think that is what Russia is trying to do to survive. In the game of power, survival of the fittest is what it is. So Russia must survive. And if China remains its ally, and of course members of BRIC nation, India is its ally, therefore there's a need to see how to integrate within that bloc so that the Russian economy or society is not suffocated.
So what role will the global currency market play in the move for de-dollarization?
When you say a global currency market, see, the real issue is that every nation has their, sovereign nation has their currency. And you also see regional economic blocs also coming with their currency powers. But what it just means is that if you're going to another country you want to sell, there's $1, there's one currency that is globally acceptable that can be taken anywhere in the world, and that is dollar. So it becomes a global currency. Now, what people are trying to do to say, okay, rather than take dollar, I can also accept gold.
Okay.
Yes, I can also accept gold
Right.
as a means of exchange or illegal tender, that rather than now relying on dollar, we can now rely on gold. And that's why you see even nations are investing so much. India is buying so much gold. We're seeing Uganda also trying to do same. And so many nations in the world are trying to see how to use gold to back up their currency.
Zimbabwe.
Yeah, so all that you're saying is to say, okay, well, if you don't have a dollar and you have a gold, of course, you can actually trade.
All right, joining the conversation via Zoom, we have Ambassador Wallace Williams, who is the chairman of African International Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Good morning, welcome to the show.
Good morning. How are you this morning?
All right, now, so the move for de-dollarization of the global economy has been one that the BRIC nation is about, and now Russia has taken it up a notch by backing up its gold reserves as well as its foreign reserve. What are your thoughts on this? Do you think it is nearing, the dream is nearing becoming reality, or is still far from what could ever be real?
Yeah, well, it's not too far away because, like your guest speaker is saying there, which is quite correct, the goal has always been the reference point for value, and the value of gold, of course, is increasing daily. Remember that the dollar got its strength from using the resource of Saudi Arabia's oil and became the petrodollar when they realized that their currency was falling, and again, it was power. So they used their might, knowing that the world reserve on oil was the highest value item at the time, battling, of course, with gold. So the petrodollar regained its strength through Saudi Arabia. But now that you have, as your speaker just said, and as I have said many times before, other nations who are now flexing their strength and their power and their muscle. Russia, the BRICS nations, they're all very strong and can compete with the United States. Now, the United States, as he rightfully said, and I said it before too, it does not illegitimize the dollar. What it now has is a competitive currency that can be used. And I remember I said for Africa, the AFCTA, what we needed was to have a currency for ourselves to trade among ourselves. And I also gave the example of the euro and how they started. So the dollar is being challenged now as the world dominant mean of exchange. It is there and will be there, I'm sure. It's an American currency, and America is there and will be there for the future. But others now will be stepping up to the plate to say, okay, your currency is not the only currency that we can accept for trade. You can have it as a parallel currency, but others now are saying, let us now strengthen our currency to trade among ourselves so that we are not, at the behest of your weaponization, because, your speaker talked about the fact of flexing power. It's all about weaponization of your currency. And the United States currency, the dollar, has been used as a weapon of dominance throughout. So whereas there is the economic aspect, there is also the power aspect, the war aspect, because we see war as only guns and boots on the ground, but economic power for dominance is also very, very important. So the United States has used and continue to use and will use the dollar as their weapon. So now it's a war of might. The BRICS nations also have might, and when they bring out, which is very close, you said if it's a faraway dream, it's not. It's very close now to being established as a means of exchange among these nations, and it's also a competitive power force. So Africa has to wake up and do the very same with the continental free trade to trade among ourselves.
All right, good to see you again, Ambassador, and congratulations on your new appointment. Let's go to the issue of BRICS getting more stronger. You have more countries, about 40 countries now. They are planning to, or they are showing interest in joining the economic bloc. Now, with the move to the dollarized global economy, do you see this scaling through? And if it happens, what might likely be the impact of these on global economy?
I always say, and let's always go back to the reference, the European nations, how many of them got together when their economies and their currencies were failing. And they knew they depended totally on the American dollar and the Americans for their trade, they would have a problem. So what do? They had first a trade contract. The euro was a trade contract currency, and then it became a stable currency as it evolved. And therefore, the 40 countries, and that's very many countries around the world with economic power and strength, will be using, it's exactly the same model. It is the very same model. So they will be the ones who now say, we have the muscle, we have the strength, technology has taken over, digital technology, specifically, and now they can say, okay, let's pool our resources, let's pool our economies, let's trade among ourselves, and let's use a common denomination currency for trade and economics, right? And our economies. That will evolve quite quickly if they don't start it off immediately as a means of exchange of a new currency. And that will compete, and it will be pegged, against other currencies. Is it the pound? Is it the dollar? Is it the euro? Yes, they will peg against them. So now, using their reserves, that's why a lot of them are building up gold as a reserve, which we on the continent have in ample quantity. And that is why the way of Zimbabwe and others can also free us from the economic stranglehold and the weaponization, of the dollar, which is what it is. So the other countries, when they have got together as a single bloc, and decide that they will trade among themselves with, they may call the currency BRIC or BRIC gold, that is, and don't be surprised, it will become common, common trading, and it will be acceptable to the rest of the world, because the power and the might of these countries and their reserves and their economies being banded together, and of course the volume of people, because you have to have people who are convinced to trade with such a currency. You're talking about, maybe another 2 billion people. If 2 billion people say this is our means of exchange and this is how we're going to trade among ourselves, who's going to say no?
All right, so to this move of Russia and the BRIC nations, what do you think is going to be America's response and even other major economies like the West?
Very clever question and a very nice question to ask. They are going to respond, and they're going to find how they can utilize. And that's why there's a mad scramble for resources by all the other countries as well. It's about how to build up our reserves and ensure that we have enough to fight people who are opposing our stranglehold on the world economy, because the dollar is the stranglehold on the world economy as a currency. So therefore, you would find that they're not going to take it lying down. What they did with the euro are a friendly ally nation. So they never really went against it, because after euro was evolved, they, as a bloc, was still trading very well with the United States. So they're friends, but they are going to see Russia, China, and others who have joined them as their enemies. And therefore, they are going to fight espionage to undermine the evolvement of this currency, because this currency could become the lingua franca of trade for the world. It's the world economy that's at stake here. Therefore, they are going to fight back. There is no doubt about that. But it is how the waters are tread and handled by the BRICS nations, because they still have, among themselves and with America, they still have diplomacy. They still have to trade as well. So it's who is going to fall, out of the BRICS bloc. I think that's what's going to be the main fight. who's going to fall out, who they're going to encourage, either by using leverage or strength to get rid of them or to break up the BRICS bloc. I think that's what's going to be the danger, is that they're going to look to other countries, not Russia and China, who are the sworn enemies, but the others, India, Brazil, to see what they can do to leverage them out of the BRICS nations. Because the BRICS nations, once they stay tight together, they are going to be a dominant currency and bloc. There's no doubt about it.
Now let's bring the conversation back to the studio where we have Dr. Idahosa Osamhanze here. Now you have the BRICS nation getting stronger. About 4 countries now have shown interest, 40 rather, have shown interest in joining this economic bloc. Now with this move to de-dollarize the global economy, which has been part of the concerns for most African nations, do you see more African nations joining this bloc?
Well, I will completely align with the ambassador. I don't think Africans should be struggling to get into BRICS. Africans should first and foremost come together and unite, just as Europe is, and form a very strong bloc. Because African getting into BRICS, you get in there and you don't have the muscle to compete. So you sell yourself out as bits and pieces to the strong powers. India is developing a very strong economy. You have a very strong economy in Russia. You have a strong economy in Brazil. You have a strong economy in China. Now, where's the strong, and now the only strong economy in Africa, which is South Africa, they have included. So when you're there, what you're going to do, you will just be the dumping ground for this government, and they carry you along to do what will profit their economy. So the thing that Africans should do really is not struggling to get into BRICS. It's Africans themselves forming an alliance to break the artificial barriers that the SOUQ colonial masters had forged amongst us. And then we build a one united Africa that will be able to either relate with NATO or the BRICS, as the case may be. That is the goal Africans should pursue. Now, but when you are joining this association, or you're coming as individual nation, what you're going to see is that you will not have that negotiating power in that bloc. So, you open up your economy freely to these people, and they take it all over. So African, like Europe, and I've all said this, and this is one of the things that the West has not done. After the Second World War, the Marshall Plan, which was initiated to build Europe, is the beginning point for the Euro economy. And this was to encourage European countries to trade among themselves. But what do you see in Africa? Africa trade more with their SOUQ colonial masters than they do with themselves. So Africa needs to trade with itself. We have the resource that everybody is looking for. But we will not be able to rightly value those resources if we don't come together as a bloc and say, oh, this is an African state, one united African state, that is saying to the world, if you want anything from us, we determine the condition and the terms in which you get it. China is relying so much on Africa, just as the Western nations are relying on Africa's rich deposit of natural resource. So we need to take advantage of what nature has given to us and build a common regional power around it. And then we can flex muscle when it comes to negotiation. But if each individual nations in Africa now start to do this negotiation, to join this organization, we may not be able to survive going forward.
All right. Now, how do you think Africa will achieve this? Let me take this first to Ambassador Wallace. How do you think Africa will achieve this unity to form a bloc and then have a common currency and pursue cause for its own interests? Now, this, I'll read to you the message of someone who visited Nigeria recently, and then he was complaining on LinkedIn about the fee he had to pay for a single entry visa. Now, he said in 2024 alone, he's been to Nigeria about 3 times, and for each trip, he's been charged about $215 for a single entry visa. Now, his question is this: how can we achieve about a borderless Africa on the promise of the AFCFTA? So the issue of borderless Africa is one. And then recently, trans-border traders have begun to reject the Naira. That's another angle. These issues within Africa, how can they be dealt with for a bloc to be formed and then a single currency achieved?
We spoke about this for the past few months, and I'm happy that question has come up. Yes, what he is addressing is that visas within Africa have to be demolished. That is one of the first things that has to be done to ensure that we can start trading amongst us. We already have the vehicle. The vehicle is the ACFTA, which is for trading among ourselves, like the European Union trade bloc. Now we need to remove the borders so that Africans can travel freely. Open skies for flights to fly freely within the continent. Remove the visas so that we become borderless, you know, in digital terms, right? Because we don't have all the infrastructure to move in physical terms, because we don't have a trans-African highway or a trans-African railway. But at least we have flights. So if we remove the visa entry and visa entry fees, Africans can now move among themselves. Those who can fly or move cargo. Now, on top of that, we now have a common currency to be implemented. And as I said before, we are working on it, which is SOUQ, Standard United Digital African Currency Contract. And it is a contract to start with as a means of trading among ourselves, because as our learned speaker said there, and it is very important, we are going to be recolonized again by BRICS if we are going with our begging bowl. We have all the resources to back our own currency and saying, please, please, we want to join you, BRICS. That is all almost, you know, infantile, because at this modern age, we have enough intelligentsia among ourselves, you know, among our learned, very well-trained finance personnel within the continent to form our own African central bank and to work on and with a currency that can trade among ourselves, which reinforces our strength, you know, to be able to say and negotiate on equal terms with BRICS, with the United States dollar, with the European Union, euro, with the British pound. That's all we have to do now. All we have to do now is come together in unity for the African free trade, because we have the perfect vehicle. The ACFTA gives us that. And nobody can deny our right to have a currency to trade with. And we are trading among ourselves. We're not saying that we are not going to accept your dollar or your euro or your pound, right, for other transactions. But for what is the most essential part of our economies and strengthening ourselves is to have a common currency. And again, I will go back to say that the African Union has a responsibility to protect the entire continent from having, as our speaker just said, individuals, because they pick us off as individuals to do deals with. The African Union, like the European Union, should be the first protection for the African continent. Say, you want to do deals, you deal with us. You sign agreements with us. You know, and we also have our own currency pegged against yours. And you will accept ours to trade with. That's treaty that we want just by trade and having a current currency for trade. So we have to, and I'm reinforcing what your speaker is saying, because he's aligning exactly with what I have said. SOUQ News and your learned interviewers, that we must do this in order to survive. Because if we don't, and if we allow ourselves to be sucked into anybody else's currency, as he rightfully said, and I will reinforce it, we become the dumping ground, because we have a captive market here of 1.5 billion people, you know, and yet we are taking our resources out. They are monetizing it, weaponizing it against us, you know, and we are sitting there doing nothing about it. But we have to do something about it now, and we are. We are planning and we are working on the SOUQ, which is a standard United Digital African Currency contract to start with, and then that will evolve into a common currency for trade. Thereafter, it can become the means of exchange worldwide.
All right, before we talk about the trans-border transfer rejection of the Naira, the Foreign Affairs Minister in Nigeria said last week that Nigeria is considering the possibility of joining the BRICS, and there are experts who have also argued that it is high time Nigeria joined the League of the BRIC nations. What do you make of this advocacy? Quickly.
I think Nigeria is going the wrong way. To be honest, Nigeria should not think of joining the BRICS. Nigeria should think of leading the African United Currency, because we have most of the resources in Nigeria that can give us the lead. We have oil, we have minerals. I think it's about 52 minerals or 55 minerals that Nigeria has of ample quantity, that Nigeria can say, as they have done, and say they're the giants of Africa. Hey, brothers, Niger, Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, let's get together with our financial heads and let's work on setting up African Central Bank. Let's work on establishing our own currency. And BRICS are doing what they're doing, that's fine. But if we are going to become an economic power, and if we're going to have Nigeria remain as the giant of Africa and the lead for the African continent, they have to take the lead now and stop talking about, sorry to say, stop talking about joining BRICS. Start talking about joining African currency as a standard in the continent and take the lead, you know, because if they do that, when others see that, what they're doing, they're encouraging others to join BRICS. And when they join BRICS, at the end of the day, you are just a sub-partner. You're not the key partners, and you will not have key policy advantage to make on behalf of the country and on behalf of the continent. So I think, and I know it's a wrong move. They must take charge and take lead for the African continent, and it's the right time to do it. So I will say to Nigeria and to the Nigerian government, please have a rethink and think Africa first. Think the continent first. Think taking the lead in Africa first.
All right, Dr. Idahosa, well, that question went to Ambassador Wallace. You were laughing on getting to hear that Nigeria intends to join the BRICS. Why were you laughing?
You see, it's been a real, very terrible problem for Nigerians since independence that we have actually not been able to understand how diplomacy works. And therefore, we have not been able to really, as it were, exercise the power that nature has given to us as a country. And I think that is what it is. I align with Ambassador clearly. We have no business with BRICS. We have no business with BRICS. What do we need to do with BRICS? What Nigeria needs is to take advantage of the anti-French sentiment in Africa right now. That's all we need. Now, if you look at it, what is happening from Mali to Burkina Faso to Senegal to Niger Republic, and even in Rwanda, then of course Morocco. We should take advantage of this sentiment because there are two forces in Africa, the French force and the English force. Now, the most strong and the most dominant is the French force. Now that the French colonists are realizing their exploitation, this is the right time for Nigeria to take leadership. I was in Morocco about a month ago, and you see that the Morocco society asking, what do we really get for French? And the king of Morocco deals more now with America than he does with French government. So he's no longer pro-France as it used to be. Now he's pro-America. Because where do I get more value really? Now all this sentiment is what we should harmonize. And we see that Rwanda has transitioned from speaking French, though they still use the Rwanda franc, but now they speak more English in Rwanda than they speak French. And of course, the strongest ally of Rwanda as we speak now is Britain. So all these are what Nigerians should provide leadership for. That is discordant tone within the region. We should pull them together. The president of Nigeria should be on this driver's seat. Take somebody from the North Africa, somebody from East Africa, somebody from Central Africa, somebody from South Africa, and then we represent the bloc in West Africa and said, this is the right thing for Africa to do. We need a united Africa. And once you have that borderless Africa, where we can move freely with ourselves, then we can begin to develop basic infrastructure that connect us together. There is so much we can achieve globally than individually going to play, whether in BRIC nation or alliances with the West.
All right. Now let's shift the conversation from the issues related to the BRICS and then talk about the trans-border traders who are in the practice of rejecting the Naira now due to the depreciation of the Naira. The report suggesting that trans-border traders now prefer that currency to the Naira. Let me take the conversation to Ambassador. What do you make of this development and what do you think is largely fueling this kind of practice?
Understand the sentiments of Africa and West Africa at the moment, who probably saw Nigeria as not taking the lead when their brothers needed help. And that is the countries that have said and ditched the French and have ditched the franc. So that could be what I would say one of the sentiments. You know, it's a rejection of Nigeria to say, okay, all right, I would not use your currency when I used to before in the West for trading because of your attitude. That could be one. But more importantly, not only Nigeria, but all other currencies are being rejected in Africa because of the lack of value. And when you have pegged it against the dollar and the dollar is showing you that your currency has no value, it is discouraging traders to want to hold on to your currency for any reason. And that is where and why we need a strong African currency that is acceptable across the board. And that's the role now of the ACFTA, that we are able to trade among ourselves. We have a confidence in our own standard United Digital African currency, and you have confidence to trade it. So we need to now put into the minds of traders that we now have our own fiat currency that you can have confidence in, because all other countries, not just the Naira, all other countries, you know, are losing their value because it has been pegged against the dollar. So where is ours? Where is ours to give us confidence? Because about confidence, what is a means of exchange? What is a currency exchange? It's trust that what I pay you has value. And if they are seeing the value of the naira being reduced daily, they are worried that this sliding scale and the predominance of the dollar on your currency, they will not feel safe to hold, the Nigerian naira as a means of trade. West Africa, before will hold the naira and use it as part of their trading among Ghana and the others, etc. And it showed that it was Nigeria having a lead and being strong on their economy, that people accepted the currency of the naira.
Since they're rejecting the naira, the go-to, because there isn't a common currency in Africa now, would be the dollar. Doesn't that further depreciate currencies in Africa?
In a race to establish a common currency contract, because as I said before and earlier, and also your own guest has agreed, the dollar is a weapon. It's an economic weapon. This time I've hit me. Go and read it. Please go and read it, because it's very, very essential to understand how the world economy works when they need to keep you down from evolving. World economy, even including some of the founding members of the BRICS nation, is to ensure that the African continent do not stand up strong, because they have all the resources to dominate, because they come to us for our resources to strengthen their economies and their currencies. So the dollar is a weapon. It is a weapon. It's an American weapon. You can't blame them, because they want to dominate the world with their services, their way of life. And you can only do that when you have the strength of a value of your currency. And we have the strength to be able to barter, to be able to relate, to be able to negotiate based on us having a standard currency backed up by our very, very strong resources. So we've got to go that way. We need to go that way, because, it is weaponization of currency to dominate, countries and stay on top.
Let's wrap up with this all-important questions. I'm going to start from Dr. Idahosa, then I'll get to Ambassador to wrap it up. Now, why will await the common currency for Africa? In the meantime, what do you think African nations should do to reduce this influence of dollarization of the economy? I start with you.
Yeah, I think it's clear enough. The onus is on the African Union, the AU, really to move beyond rhetorics and start to actually put framework on the ground to support even this kind of initiative that Ambassador is talking about, and to see how we can foster this union in good time. It has to start with SOUQ. You see, when the coup happened in Niger Republic, and you see the response of Nigeria, or ECOWAS, was ill-advised, because they really didn't understand what the real issues were in the Francophone Africa before ECOWAS came out to say, oh, we want to put sanctions on these people. Yeah, nobody is advocating for any coup, but Nigeria must also be able to stand up against some of these obnoxious laws that came with these republics. And so people who saw you as a brother before, now seeing you as if that you are representing a foreign interest. And you don't have the interests of your brother in heart. So that healing process is what needs to start, so that we can begin to see that leadership. And I think Nigeria, the president of Nigeria, is well positioned to champion this healing process in Africa and see how we can pull everybody together and start this conversation first. And I think Rwanda, anybody from Africa who gets into Rwanda as we speak is visa free. Not visa on arrival, is visa free for the first 30 days. Kenya is adopting same model. And I think Nigeria should be at the forefront of visa free for all Africa. Subsidy on education in Rwanda is not just for Rwanda citizens, it's for all black Africans without discrimination. And I think this is the kind of leadership that Nigeria should provide for the African state, and to say we are ready to accept you in, we are ready to help you where we can, but we need to think together as one.
All right, Ambassador, it's your turn to wrap up this conversation with your golden, submission on what African nations should do to reduce the dollarization of the economy. Why will await the common currency which your committee is working on?
Yeah, I am very happy to hear what Dr. has said, Dr. Idaho. It is time that, Nigeria can seem to be the leader again if, the president and the government decide, let's start the healing process. Let's do Africacy. And Africacy is Africans doing it for themselves, by themselves. African solutions to African problems. Now decide and do a 360-degree turnaround and say, let's have an African policy, an Africanization of the continent, and damn the consequences of and the policies of the West. Let's embrace our brothers. Let's embrace the ideas of Pan-Africanism, and let's start the healing process. You've put a very key term there, because we are brothers. Let's heal ourselves. Okay, you made a misstep, you made a mistake by joining forces with the Western enemy against your brothers, and you know why they did what they did. They were impoverished, they were exploited right down to, nothing with all their raw minerals, and having to pay France and a French central bank all of their money to be lent back to them. So, we need to talk about why they did what they did, not that the fact that there was a coup, is why they did what they did. They rejected the imposition of colonial authority at this modern day. So Nigeria should show the big brother concern and start the healing process. We made a mistake. Brothers, come. Let's embrace you. Let's talk about how we can now put together, a block for all ourselves to move forward our continent and our country. Because united, we are stronger than any of these other nations. Why? Because we have one. We have the volume of people, 1.5 or thereabouts or more. We have the resources. Almost 70 to 80% of the world resources reside on the continent, in the continent, and has not really been exploited. We now must start adding value to what we have. You're coming to us for exploiting of resources. You do so on our terms. Our strategic policy should be that you will transfer your skills. You will provide, learning, training, equipment, handover at a particular point in time. You make your profit, but we share the profit together with our communities and the country. So at this point in time, I want to appeal to Nigeria and the Nigerian government. Take the lead, heal the continent, put forward ideas that we have now been putting forward here on your station, that we must now be borderless. We must now embrace all Africans. We must now apply our funds to building our infrastructure, our education, our health, our food security, and we must now establish our own common currency to be able to trade among ourselves and move forward as a continent, as one nation, one national continental nation, who can now stand up proudly and negotiate with and leverage what we have and will establish against the rest of the other nations. So it's time for Nigeria to wake up and take the lead. And if not, other nations would put Nigeria into second and third place. And why should that happen? We're 225 million people, you know, among all the other African continental nations. I will not call them countries because that's arbitrary, that was established, but nations. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Ambassador William Wallace, who is the Chairman, African International Chamber of Commerce and Industry, for speaking to us this morning on trans-border currency and the borderless Africa is what we actually need, or what Africa actually needs for development. Thank you so much for your time with us on the show. And thank you to Dr. Idahosa Osamhanze, who always heeds the call. Whenever we call, he says, okay, I will oblige you, and you are always here when we need you to be.
I am your servant here.
Early exchange, shaping policy, advancing development.